All right, let's get right into one of the most incredible stories of survival in aviation history. We're talking about Air Transat Flight 236. On August 24th, 2001, it was supposed to be just a totally normal overnight flight, Toronto to Lisbon. But it turned into something nobody on board would ever forget.
I want you to just picture this for a second. You're on a massive 200-ton jetliner, thousands of feet over the pitch-black Atlantic Ocean, and the engines just go silent. I mean complete, dead silence, where that constant roar should be. There's nothing below you but miles of cold, dark water.
And that's how many lives were on the line. 293 passengers and a crew of 13, all of them suddenly hanging in this eerie, terrifying quiet. And you have to understand, nothing like this had really happened before. A modern jet losing all its fuel to a leak? There was no playbook, no training for this exact scenario. They were completely on their own.
So how does a state-of-the-art airliner end up in a situation like this? Well, the answer is just fascinating. And it doesn't start in the cockpit mid-flight. Nope. To really get what happened, we've got to go back 9 days before the flight to a maintenance hangar where a single, tiny mistake was made. It all kicked off with what should have been a totally routine engine replacement. But a tiny, almost unnoticeable mismatch of parts, we're talking a difference of millimeters, is what set the stage for this near disaster thousands of feet in the air. So here's the breakdown. The maintenance crew was really under the gun, time-wise. They hit a snag trying to fit a new hydraulic pump. The problem was, the online service manual they needed was down, network outage. So with the clock ticking, the lead technician makes a call. He decides to improvise, to just make it work, and he ends up fitting together two parts that were never, ever designed to be together.
And this, right here, this is the absolute core of the problem. The official rulebook was crystal clear. If you replace one of these tubes, you have to replace the other as a matched set. But he couldn't see that rule, so he paired an old hydraulic line with a newer fuel line. And the result? Well, those two metal tubes were now rubbing up against each other. Every vibration, every flight was slowly but surely grinding away at the fuel line. It was a ticking time bomb.
Okay, so let's jump forward now to the night of the flight, August 24th. This is where that hidden mechanical flaw is about to collide with a series of human decisions in the cockpit to create an absolute catastrophe. So in the dead of night, the pilots start getting these confusing warnings. First, some weird oil readings. They figure, probably a computer glitch. Then a big one, fuel imbalance. The right tank is way lower than the left. Thinking it's just an imbalance, they decide to fix it, but the fix they chose was about to make things 1,000,000 times worse.
And this is the critical moment. Instead of pulling out the physical checklist for this kind of problem, the crew just worked from memory. And the checklist had a giant flashing warning sign on it that said, essentially, if you even think you have a fuel leak, do not open the crossfeed valve. But they missed it. By opening that valve to balance the fuel, they accidentally started pumping all the good fuel from the left tank directly into the engine that was leaking. Their attempt to fix a simple imbalance was now literally draining the plane's entire fuel supply. What started as a small leak in one engine had just become a catastrophic hemorrhage, pouring all of their precious fuel out into the night sky over the Atlantic. And then, at 6:26 a.m., just 13 minutes after the first engine quit, the second one sputtered and died. The constant hum of the engines just vanished. In that one instant, a massive Airbus A330 with 306 people on board became, for all intents and purposes, a 200-ton glider. That's how far they were from the nearest runway, 144 kilometers. It was a military airbase on the Azores Islands, just a tiny speck in the ocean. And they had to glide that entire distance with no power, losing altitude every single second.
But the plane had one last trick up its sleeve. As everything went dark, the small propeller, called the ram air turbine, the RAT, automatically popped out from the fuselage. It's basically a little emergency windmill. And as the plane glided, the wind spun this turbine, generating just enough hydraulic and electrical power for Captain Robert Pichet to have some basic control of the plane. It was their only lifeline.
Back in the cabin, it was pure terror, total darkness, and that unnatural, terrifying silence. The crew, trying to stay professional, started preparing everyone for the worst, a ditching in the ocean. They were demonstrating life vests, shouting, "Brace, brace, brace." For everyone on board, it truly felt like this was the end.
But up in the cockpit, the pilots were fighting back. And here's where fate, or luck, or whatever you want to call it, stepped in. Captain Pichet, as it turns out, was a very experienced glider pilot. He used every ounce of that skill to somehow steer this massive, silent jet towards that tiny runway he could barely even see.
For 19 minutes, they flew without power. 19 minutes. That is the longest unpowered glide of a commercial airliner ever. And at the end of it, the plane slammed down hard at Lajes Air Base. This was not a landing. It was a controlled crash.
And the landing was unbelievably violent. The plane hit the runway so hard it blew out 8 of its 10 tires. But it held together, and in less than 2 minutes, every single person was evacuated. The result? No fatalities. It was an absolute miracle.
So immediately after, Captain Pichet was hailed as a global hero, and rightly so. But the celebration didn't last long. The media dug into his past and discovered that years earlier, he'd actually served prison time for drug smuggling. And this just ignited a firestorm of controversy about second chances and who we trust in the cockpit.
When the investigators put it all together, they realized this wasn't about one single mistake. It was a whole chain of failures. It's a perfect real-world example of what safety experts call the Swiss cheese model. You have all these layers of defense: design, maintenance, pilot procedures, and each has a few small holes. Usually, they don't line up. But on this day, all the holes lined up perfectly, and disaster slipped right through.
You know, the story of Flight 236 is just this powerful, chilling reminder that safety in our modern world is this incredibly complex system. And on that August night, when all the technology and all the procedures failed, the only thing that stood between 306 people and the cold, dark Atlantic Ocean was the skill and ingenuity of one human being.